For decades, Western powers, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, have operated under the assumption that their global dominance is unchallenged and permanent. Political analysts, military strategists, and media narratives reinforce the notion that Western nations alone control the levers of escalation, warfare, and economic coercion. Whenever any non-Western country dared to assert itself strategically, the reaction was immediate moral outrage, sanctions, or military threats. This mindset created an illusion of unassailable supremacy, convincing the world that the West could dictate outcomes without significant pushback, and that any challenge to its authority would inevitably fail. The West assumed that Russia, when confronted with unprecedented sanctions and political isolation following the invasion of Ukraine, would crumble both economically and militarily. Instead, Russia adapted rapidly. Its defense production surged, supply chains were restructured, and the economy stabilized under pressure. For the first time in recent history, Western intelligence and policymakers recognized that their prior assumptions were flawed. Russia had not only survived, but strategically maneuvered to strengthen itself, demonstrating that Western predictions of collapse were overly simplistic and dangerously complacent. This unexpected resilience placed Western leadership in a reactive position. NATO and European powers, having committed heavily to Ukraine, found themselves overstretched and uncertain. Western leaders, Biden, Sunak, and other key figures, appeared increasingly inconsistent, pivoting policies week after week, struggling to craft a coherent long-term strategy. Instead of demonstrating control, the West was forced to adapt constantly to a conflict they had underestimated, revealing a fundamental vulnerability. The assumption that force and sanctions could unilaterally shape the global order was now in question. While Russia's resurgence caught the West off guard, China's rapid military transformation has become an even more profound shock. Analysts and policymakers long assumed that China's military remained untested and technologically behind the United States. Yet in a series of recent maneuvers and technological disclosures, China demonstrated systems that rival and in some cases exceed Western capabilities. From advanced missile tracking to hypersonic weapons and anti-satellite technology, China's strategic advances have shifted the perception of global military balance in real time. When China publicly revealed the technical capabilities of a new missile tracking and targeting system, the revelation sent ripples of concern through the American military community. This system, capable of coordinating hypersonic and anti-satellite strikes, poses the terrifying possibility of disrupting satellite networks and critical communications within hours. The sheer audacity of China's announcement forced Western defense analysts to confront a reality they had long dismissed. In strategic terms, China is rapidly closing the technological gap, potentially threatening decades of perceived U.S. superiority. While publicly the United States downplayed these developments, internally, the Pentagon and intelligence agencies were alarmed. Military planners realized that the speed and precision of China's technological growth were unprecedented. Unlike past decades where the U.S. could rely on overwhelming technological advantage, the margin for error is narrowing. Every miscalculation could have immediate consequences, forcing policymakers to reconsider long-held assumptions about global power dynamics and the sustainability of American dominance. Adding to the tension, a spokesperson from China's Eastern Theater Command issued a rare direct warning to both the United States and Taiwan, known for measured statements rather than overt threats. His precise language signaled that China is no longer merely preparing for conflict. They are preparing to achieve decisive victory. This is a stark departure from the historically cautious and indirect messaging China has used, marking a moment of bold assertiveness that surprised global observers. Immediately following the warning, China deployed several naval vessels into the East China Sea. These warships openly shadowed U.S., P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft demonstrating a calculated display of strategic awareness and technological capability. By keeping transponders on and movements fully visible, China sent an unmistakable signal to Washington and allied forces. They are watching, they are capable, and they are prepared for escalation if provoked. China's transparency in this maneuver was deliberate. The military maintained full visibility of all operations, broadcasting a clear and unambiguous message. We see you. We are ready. Do not underestimate our capabilities. For decades, China relied on ambiguity to deter external threats. Now, by demonstrating confidence and visibility, it has fundamentally changed the strategic calculus in the region, signaling that assertive action is now an active part of their national doctrine. Meanwhile, the United States is stretched dangerously thin between Ukraine, ongoing Middle Eastern conflicts, domestic political instability, and a growing military recruitment crisis. America's ability to respond decisively is compromised. China is acting at a moment when U.S. resources, attention, and political will are dispersed. This creates an extraordinary window for Beijing to assert its influence and power, exploiting gaps left by a distracted superpower. For decades, the U.S. assumed it could control escalation, set the rules, and determine global outcomes. But today, major powers are challenging this authority. Russia demonstrates resilience, China demonstrates capability, and regional alliances are increasingly fluid. The unipolar world once dominated by Western powers is fragmenting. Emerging nations are asserting influence, testing limits, and redefining what global power looks like in the 21st century. If China's hypersonic and anti-satellite systems are operational, America's era of uncontested military dominance is effectively over. Once untouchable aircraft carriers are now exposed as vulnerable targets. Strategic calculations must now account for technologies and capabilities that could neutralize centuries of naval and aerospace advantages in hours or days. The illusion of absolute superiority has crumbled, forcing a reevaluation of decades-long defense planning. Western nations continue to publicly maintain the narrative of control and competence, but internally the acknowledgement of vulnerability is widespread. The strategic monopoly once held by the U.S. and its allies is slipping. Losing that monopoly is far more destabilizing than losing a single war. It reshapes alliances, military doctrine, and the global balance of power in ways that can take decades to correct. Across the world, countries are preparing for a post-American global order. Russia, China, and other influential nations are recalibrating their strategic policies, anticipating a world where Western dominance is no longer guaranteed. The U.S. remains powerful, but is no longer the uncontested architect of global outcomes. This requires a paradigm shift in understanding how future conflicts, trade, and diplomacy will unfold. The overarching message from China's assertive actions this week is clear. The era of Western supremacy is ending. This is more than military posturing. It represents a shift in global perception. Nations now see that power is not centralized in Washington, and the world will soon be shaped by a more multipolar reality where influence, strategy, and alliances are negotiated across diverse centers of power rather than dictated by a single hegemon.